In the vast and fascinating history of American coinage, few pieces capture the quiet yet enduring significance of everyday money. Like the 1972 Roosevelt dime, a small silver-colored coin that most people have handled countless times without realizing. The depth of history design changes minting challenges and economic contexts that surround it to understand the true story of the 1972 dime. One must begin with the origins of the Roosevelt dime itself, created in 1946 to honor President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the nation's only four-term president who led America through the Great Depression and the Second World War, and whose image was chosen for the dime not only for his towering leadership, but also because of his direct association with the March of Dimes, a charitable campaign launched to fight polio, the disease Roosevelt himself battled for much of his life. The dime, therefore, became more than just currency. It was a symbol of resilience, unity, and progress in the American story. By the time the 1972 issue rolled off the presses, the United States was in a period of change. The nation had already transitioned away from silver coinage following the Coinage Act of 1965, and the dime was now struck in a copper-nickel clad composition with an inner core of pure copper sandwiched between outer layers of nickel. This change was critical to preserve the nation's silver reserves, which were being depleted by rising demand and hoarding. So when you hold a 1972 dime, you are looking at a coin that represents the new era of modern coinage, no longer tied to precious metal content, but instead reflecting practicality, mass production, and the economic realities of the late 20th century. The coin was struck at three mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each had its own story. Philadelphia dimes of 1972 carried no mint mark in keeping with tradition. Denver issues bore the D mark and were produced in massive quantities, while the San Francisco mint focused primarily on proof coins, specially struck for collectors with mirrored fields and frosted designs, which today remain sought after by numismatists who appreciate their artistry beyond mint origins. The 1972 dime also reflects the intricate design work of John R. Sinnock, the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint, who first crafted Roosevelt's portrait in 1946. His initials J.S. appear at the base of Roosevelt's neck, and for decades a baseless rumor spread that those initials secretly represented Joseph Stalin. Such myths, though completely false, highlight how coinage often becomes the subject of cultural and political speculation, while the obverse presents Roosevelt's profile with the words, "Liberty and in God we trust," the reverse displays a torch symbolizing liberty, flanked by an olive branch for peace and an oak branch for strength, a timeless design that continues to this day. But the real history of the 1972 dime is not just in its design, it is in its role within the greater economic landscape of America during the early 70s. Inflation was climbing, wages were shifting, and yet the dime retained its essential place in daily life. Vending machines, payphones, laundromats, and everyday transactions relied on it. Millions of children carried it in their pockets to buy candy or gum, while adults used it for parking meters and countless small purchases, which means that beyond its metallic composition, the 1972 dime represents a tangible artifact of how Americans lived, worked, and moved through the world in that period. Collectors today study the 1972 dime, not for its silver content, but for its minting varieties and error coins, for example, dimes that were struck off-center, or those with doubling errors on the lettering can command significant premiums far above face value. The proof issues, particularly the deep cameo varieties with their sharp contrast between frosted devices and mirrored fields, are especially prized. The condition also matters enormously, since most dimes circulated heavily and became worn. High-grade uncirculated specimens graded MS65 and above by professional services like PCGS or NGC can fetch strong prices, and thus the 1972 dime is both common in circulation, yet uncommon in pristine quality. It occupies a fascinating place where the ordinary intersects with the collectible, a reflection of how numismatics transforms small everyday objects into windows of history. To tell the story of this coin is to tell the story of a nation transitioning through post-war prosperity, civil rights struggles, the Vietnam era, and an economy adjusting to modern realities, all while Roosevelt's steady gaze on the dime reminded Americans of resilience, courage, and progress. The coin's journey from the presses of the U.S. Mint into pockets, purses, banks, and collections ties together millions of individual lives across decades. It shows us how a 10-cent piece becomes not merely money, but a historical document preserved in metal for future generations who seek to understand their past. And so the 1972 Roosevelt dime is more than just a small coin. It is a legacy of design, of leadership, of economic change, and of the shared experiences of countless Americans whose hands it passed through, making it a truly rare American coin. Not because it is scarce in number, but because of the rare and enduring story it tells about a country and its people. The 1972 Roosevelt dime is a small coin, but behind its modest size lies an entire world of meaning and history that most people overlook. And to understand its place in numismatic heritage, we must travel back in time, not just to 1972, but decades before, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was alive, leading the United States through some of the most turbulent and transformative moments in modern history. Roosevelt was elected to the presidency in 1932 at the height of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were out of work, banks were collapsing, and confidence in the system was at an all-time low. His New Deal policies reshaped government intervention in the economy, providing relief to struggling families, reforming industries, and restoring hope. And for many, Roosevelt became a symbol of resilience. A man who, despite his battle with polio, stood tall as a leader when the country needed one most. And later, during the Second World War, his voice and steady guidance became a rallying point not only for Americans but also for allies. Across the world, when he passed away in 1945, the nation mourned deeply, and the Treasury Department quickly sought to honor him on the dime, not only because of his leadership, but also because of his personal connection to the March of Dimes campaign, which had raised money to fight polio, the very disease he had endured. Thus, in 1946, the Roosevelt dime was born carrying his profile on the obverse with the strong inscriptions, "Liberty and in God we trust," a coin that merged personal sacrifice with national memory. By the time 1972 arrived, the Roosevelt dime had already been in circulation for more than 25 years. And during that period, American coinage itself had undergone sweeping changes, the most important of which was the Coinage Act of 1965 that eliminated silver from circulating dimes and quarters. Prior to 1965. These coins contained 90% silver and 10% copper, making them valuable not just as money, but also for their bullion content as silver. Prices rose. The public began hoarding coins, and the mint could not keep up with demand, leading Congress to act and switch the dime to a clad composition beginning in 1965. The dime was now made of an inner copper core, bonded to outer layers of nickel, a sandwich-like structure that gave the coin its silvery appearance, while drastically lowering costs. So when collectors today study a 1972 dime, they are looking at a coin that belongs firmly to this modern clad era, no longer tied to precious metal, but representing efficiency, durability, and mass production, suitable for an America that was expanding rapidly, both economically and demographically.